The Great Chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest room ever built by any species in known space. It stretched for 3 kilometers from end to end, carved from black stone that had been polished until it shone like dark water. Thousands of seats rose in circular tiers around the central platform, and in those seats sat the representatives of 47 different species from across the galaxy. Ambassador Daniel Cole stood in the human delegation's small alcove, watching the proceedings with tired eyes. He was 53 years old, with gray hair at his temples and lines on his face that had not been there when he first took this job 15 years ago. Beside him stood Commander Lisa Park, his military aide, and Kevin Grant, a young diplomatic attaché who had only been on the job for 6 months. On the central platform, High Arbiter Vorax was speaking. Vorax was a Theshan, a species that looked somewhat like tall, thin humans made of pale blue crystal. When he spoke, his voice rang through the chamber like the sound of wind chimes. "The Council has reviewed humanity's petition for full membership," Vorax announced. "We have examined their technological development, their social structures, and their history. After careful consideration, the motion to grant membership is denied." A murmur ran through the chamber. Some delegates looked surprised. Others looked pleased. A few looked almost bored, as if they had known this would happen all along. Vorax continued. "Furthermore, the Council has decided that humans present a potential risk to galactic stability. They are hereby restricted to their home system until such time as they can demonstrate adequate civilizational maturity. All human vessels currently in Council space must return to Earth within 30 standard days." Daniel Cole felt Lisa Park stiffen beside him. Kevin Grant made a small sound of disbelief, but Daniel himself showed nothing. He had been doing this job too long to be surprised by cruelty. The Rithani delegate rose from his seat. The Rithani were insectoid creatures, standing over 2 meters tall, with hard shells and clicking mandibles. This particular delegate was named Crix, and he had made his hatred of humans well known over the years. "A wise decision," Crix said, his voice a harsh clicking sound. "Perhaps in another 1,000 years the humans will learn their place among the lesser species." Laughter spread through the chamber. Each species had its own way of expressing amusement: chirps, hums, guttural sounds, flashing colors. But the meaning was clear enough. They were laughing at humanity. They were laughing at Daniel and his delegation. They were laughing at Earth and everyone on it. The Morani delegate, a blue-scaled female named Yevith, added her own comment. "The humans should be grateful we allow them to keep their own system. After the trouble they've caused, some would argue for stricter measures." More laughter. Daniel Cole listened to it all. He thought about the 30 years humanity had spent trying to prove themselves to these beings. He thought about the technological gifts humans had offered freely, asking nothing in return. He thought about the trade agreements that always seemed to favor Council species. He thought about the Kepler colony, where 3,000 human children had died of a disease that Council medicine could have cured in hours. But no ship would come because humans were not worth the resources. He thought about his daughter, who had been one of those children. "Ambassador Cole," Vorax said, his crystalline voice cutting through the laughter, "you have the right to appeal. You may speak in your defense if you wish." The chamber grew quiet. Every eye turned to the human alcove. They were expecting him to beg, Daniel realized. They wanted to watch him plead for mercy, to humble himself before them. It would make a good story for them to tell back home. Daniel straightened his jacket. He turned to Lisa and Kevin. His voice was calm and quiet when he spoke. "Pack everything. We're leaving." Lisa blinked. "Sir, everything. Every document, every data chip, every personal item. Leave nothing behind. We're going home." Kevin looked stunned. "But the appeal? There will be no appeal." Daniel turned and walked toward the exit. Lisa and Kevin hurried to follow him, their footsteps echoing in the sudden silence of the chamber. "Ambassador Cole," Vorex called out. There was confusion in his voice now. "You have not given your response. Do you accept the Council's judgment?" Daniel stopped at the great doors of the chamber. He stood there for a moment, his back to the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. Then he turned his head. Just enough to look back at them, got 40-7 species watched him. Thousands of delegates waited for his answer. The most powerful beings in the known galaxy had just humiliated his people, and now they expected him to either fight or surrender. Daniel Cole did neither. "No," he said quietly. "I don't think we will." He pushed open the doors and walked out. Lisa and Kevin followed him. The doors swung shut behind them with a soft boom that seemed to echo for a long time. In the chamber, silence stretched for several seconds. The delegates looked at each other in confusion. High Arbiter Vorex turned to his aide, a younger Theshan named Velis. "What just happened?" Vorex asked. Velis had no answer. The Rathani delegate Crix made a dismissive gesture with his upper limbs. "The humans are throwing a tantrum. They will calm down. They have no choice. Where else can they go?" Several delegates murmured agreement. The humans were a young species, barely 3 centuries into space travel. They had no major allies, no powerful fleet, no great wealth. They depended on Council trade routes for dozens of essential goods. They would come crawling back soon enough. But Ambassador Yeveth of the Marani Collective was not so sure. She had dealt with humans before, and she had learned to watch them carefully. There was something about the way the human ambassador had walked out that bothered her. He had not seemed angry. He had not seemed defeated. He had seemed like a man who had finally made a decision he had been putting off for a long time. "I think," Yeveth said slowly, "that we may have made a mistake." No one listened to her. The Council moved on to other business. The human matter was considered closed. 3 days later, the first reports came in. The human embassy on Nexus Station was empty. Human trade vessels were leaving Council space. Communication channels to Earth had gone silent. And by then, it was already too late. 3 days after the human delegation walked out of the Council chamber, High Arbiter Vorex sat in his private office and tried to understand what was happening. He had sent 17 official messages to Earth. None had received a reply. He had contacted the human embassy on Nexus Station, only to find it completely empty. The staff had left in the middle of the night, taking everything with them. Even the furniture was gone. All that remained were bare walls and silence. His aide Velis stood before him with a data tablet, reading off reports that made less sense with every passing hour. "Every human trade vessel in Council space has departed," Velis said. "All 247 of them. They shut off their transponders at the edge of map space. We cannot track where they went." "They're hiding," Vorex said. "They'll come back when they get hungry." "Perhaps, High Arbiter. But there is more." Velis handed him the tablet. Vorex looked at the list of items on the screen and felt the first small touch of worry in his chest. Human engineers had designed the water purification systems on 14 Council space stations. Human software ran the traffic control networks at 9 major trading hubs. Human agricultural scientists had modified the crops that fed 3 different species. Human doctors had developed treatments for diseases that had killed millions before their arrival. Human mathematicians had created the encryption codes that protected galactic banking. The list went on for pages. "This cannot be right," Vorex said. "Humans are a minor species. They have only been part of galactic society for 30 years. How can they be involved in so many things?" "They offered their services cheaply," Velis explained. "Sometimes for free. They said they wanted to help, to prove their worth. Many species accepted because the work was good and the price was low. No one thought to ask what would happen if they left. Vorik stared at the tablet. He thought about all the times he had dismissed humans as unimportant. He thought about all the times he had laughed at their requests for respect. He thought about the vote 3 days ago, when he had stood on the platform and told an entire species that they were not worthy of being treated as equals. "Call an emergency session," he said quietly. "We need to discuss this." The emergency session took place 2 days later. By then, the problems had already begun. Councillor Yevith of the Morani Collective was the first to speak. Her blue scales had turned pale, a sign of great stress in her species. "Our communication networks are failing," she reported. "The translation algorithms that allow our ships to speak with each other were designed by a human company called Bright Path Communications. The servers that run these algorithms were located on a human station called Haven Point. That station has gone dark. Without those algorithms, our ships cannot understand each other. Fleet coordination has become nearly impossible." The Cathari delegate spoke next. The Cathari were a proud species, tall and strong, with skin like polished metal. But the delegate's voice shook as he delivered his report. "Our entire financial system runs on quantum encryption protocols developed by human mathematicians. The maintenance contracts expired yesterday. Without renewal, the systems are beginning to fail. We have already lost access to 3 major banking networks. If this continues, our economy will collapse within weeks." One by one, the delegates stood and shared similar stories. The Deshans reported that their food crops were dying. A grain called Veleth, which fed billions of their people, had been modified by human scientists to produce 3 times as much food. But the modification required yearly treatments to remain stable. Without those treatments, the crops were reverting to their original, less productive form. The Rithani delegate Crix tried to maintain his usual arrogance, but even he could not hide his fear. Human pharmaceutical companies had been supplying cheap medicines that treated several serious Rithani diseases. Those supplies had stopped. Already, hospitals were running low. Ancient sicknesses that had been nearly forgotten were beginning to return. "This is blackmail," Crix declared. "The humans are trying to force us to accept them. We should respond with strength. Send warships to their system and demand they resume their services." "We cannot," Yevith said. "Our navigation systems depend on human-made star charts and software. 3 ships attempted long-distance travel yesterday. 2 arrived at the wrong locations. The 3rd never arrived at all. We believe it was lost in hyperspace." A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Varix tried to contact Earth directly. The message he received in return was simple and cold. "Humanity is not receiving visitors at this time. Please do not attempt to enter human space. Any vessels that cross our borders will be turned away." That was all. No demands. No threats. No negotiations. Just silence. In his private moments, Varix began to understand what had happened. Humans had not joined galactic society as beggars hoping for scraps. They had come as builders, as fixers, as problem solvers. They had seen needs and filled them. They had seen gaps and bridged them. They had made themselves useful in 1,000 small ways. And they had done it so quietly that no one noticed. And now they had simply stopped. The galaxy had spent 30 years laughing at humans, calling them children, denying them respect and dignity. And all that time, the humans had been weaving themselves into the fabric of civilization so deeply that pulling them out would tear everything apart. What do we do? Velis asked his master that night. Varix had no answer. For the first time in his long career, he was truly afraid. Somewhere in the darkness of space, 247 human ships sailed toward home. And behind them, the great machine of galactic civilization began to break down, one piece at a time. 8 weeks had passed since the humans walked away, and the galaxy was falling apart. On the Deshan homeworld of Thesa Prime, billions of people were starving. The Velith crops had failed completely now. Fields that had once been golden with grain stood brown and dead under the pale sun. Food riots had broken out in every major city. The government had declared emergency rationing, but it was not enough. People were dying. High Arbiter Voryx watched the news reports from his office and felt sick. He had been born on a farm in the northern provinces. His grandmother had grown Velith in the old way, before the human modifications, when harvests were small and hunger was common. He remembered the stories she told about the hard times, about children going to bed with empty stomachs, about families splitting up because there was not enough food for everyone. He had thought those days were gone forever. He had been wrong. Across the galaxy, the Morani Collective faced its own disaster. Without the translation algorithms, their fleet had become useless. Ships could not communicate with each other or with stations. Commanders gave orders that were not understood. Pilots flew blind, unable to receive guidance from traffic control. Crashes were becoming common. Just yesterday, 2 cargo vessels had collided at a major trading hub, killing 300 people. The Cathari economy had collapsed completely. Banks had closed. Markets had stopped trading. The value of their currency had dropped to almost nothing. People who had been wealthy found themselves with money that could not buy food. Factories shut down because workers could not be paid. Hospitals ran out of supplies because no one could afford to ship them. And the Rithani were dying of diseases they had thought were long defeated. Crix, the delegate who had laughed loudest at the humans in the council chamber, now spent his days begging for help. He contacted species who still had medicine, offering anything in exchange. But everyone was facing their own problems. No one had resources to spare. The council met again, but this time there was no arrogance, no laughter, no jokes about primitive humans. The delegates sat in their seats and stared at each other with hollow eyes. "We must send an envoy," Voryx said. His voice was rough from lack of sleep. "We must find a way to negotiate with the humans. Whatever they want, we will give them." "They do not respond to our messages," Yevith reminded him. "We have tried every channel. Military frequencies, diplomatic codes, emergency broadcasts. Nothing. Then we go to them directly. We send a ship to their system and ask for a meeting. We tried that as well. 7 ships have approached the human border in the past 3 weeks. All of them were turned away. The humans did not use weapons. They simply broadcast a message telling the ships to leave. When the ships did not leave fast enough, human vessels escorted them out of the area. Then we send a fleet," Crix said. His voice was desperate now, all his pride gone. "We forced them to negotiate. With what fleet?" Yevith asked bitterly. "Our ships cannot navigate safely. Our crews cannot communicate. Half our vessels are stuck in port because we cannot get replacement parts that humans used to supply. We have no fleet to send." The truth hung in the air like poison. The Galactic Council, which had ruled known space for 10,000 years, was helpless. The species they had dismissed as children had brought them to their knees without firing a single shot. In a small office on a Morani station, a young clerk named Tevis was going through old records. His job was to find any information that might help the council understand what had happened. He had been searching for days, reading through hundreds of documents, looking for clues. What he found made his blood run cold. The records showed that humans had been planning this for years. Not the walkout itself, perhaps, but the position they had built. They had studied every weakness in galactic civilization. They had identified every critical system that lacked proper support. And then, patiently and quietly, they had filled those gaps. They had offered their services for low prices or for free. They had trained no one else to do the work. They had built systems that only they understood. They had made themselves necessary without anyone realizing it, and they had done it while being mocked, insulted, and denied basic respect. Tevis found a report from 15 years ago. A human diplomat named Susan Walsh had written to her government about the situation. The final paragraph stayed with him long after he finished reading. They do not see us as a threat because they do not see us at all. We are invisible to them, just workers and servants. They do not realize that the servant who cleans your house also knows where you keep your valuables. They do not understand that the cook who prepares your food also controls whether you eat or starve. We will continue to serve them, and we will continue to build, and when the time comes, they will learn what we have always known. The quiet ones are the dangerous ones. Tevis shared the report with his superiors. They shared it with the council. And finally, the leaders of 47 species understood just how badly they had underestimated humanity. But understanding did not help them. The crops were still failing. The ships were still grounded. The banks were still closed. The sick were still dying. And the humans remained silent, on Earth, in a quiet room in a government building. Ambassador Daniel Cole sat and watched reports from across the galaxy. He saw the food riots on Thesa Prime. He saw the crashed ships at Marani stations. He saw the economic chaos in Kithari markets. He saw the hospitals on Rithani worlds filling with patients who had no medicine. He felt no joy at their suffering. But he felt no guilt either. 30 years of insults. 30 years of denial. 3,000 children dead on Kepler colony because no one would help. His own daughter, cold in the ground, because the council had decided that human lives were not worth saving. Let them learn, he thought. Let them finally understand what it means to be alone. Admiral Victor Hayes stood on the observation deck of the starship Dauntless and watched the edge of human space. Beyond the line of marker buoys that marked the border, hundreds of alien vessels floated in the darkness. They had been gathering there for weeks now, like beggars outside a locked door. Some were military ships, their weapons powered down to show they meant no harm. Others were cargo vessels, empty and waiting to be filled with goods that no longer came. A few were luxury yachts belonging to wealthy aliens who had come to personally beg for help. All of them broadcast the same message over and over. Please, we need to talk. Victor was 61 years old. He had spent his entire adult life serving in the human fleet, working his way up from a young officer on a patrol ship to the commander of the Border Defense Force. He had seen a lot in those years. He had fought pirates and defended colonies and negotiated with alien captains who looked down on him like he was an insect. Through it all, he had kept his calm and done his duty. But watching those ships gather at the border filled him with a feeling he had never expected. It was not satisfaction exactly. It was something quieter than that. It was the feeling of finally being seen. Dr. Megan Riley joined him on the observation deck. She was the chief scientist of the Dauntless, a small woman with short brown hair and sharp eyes. She had been monitoring the communications from the alien ships. 17 more arrived today, she said. The Thesians are begging now. Actual begging. Their high arbiter sent a personal message saying he would do anything, give anything, if we would just talk to them. Should I feel bad about that? Victor asked. Megan thought about the question. She thought about her brother, who had been a doctor on the Kepler colony. He had sent message after message to Council species, asking for help during the outbreak. He had described the symptoms, the death rate, the fact that children were dying fastest. He had promised anything in return for medicine. No one had answered. A brother had died along with his patients, alone and forgotten, because the galaxy had decided that human lives did not matter. No, she said. I really don't. On Earth, President Catherine Moore prepared to address the unified human government. The speech would be broadcast to every human world and station, every ship and outpost, every place where human beings lived and worked. She stood at a podium in the Great Assembly Hall, looking out at the representatives of humanity. These were not diplomats begging for scraps from alien masters. These were free people, choosing their own path. For 30 years, she began, we asked only for fairness. We came to the stars with open hands and hopeful hearts. We offered our skills, our knowledge, our labor. We asked only to be treated as equals, to be given the same respect that every other species received. She paused, letting her words sink in. They called us children. They called us animals. They locked us in our own solar system and told us we were not mature enough to travel to stars. They laughed when our people died because helping us was not worth the trouble. They took everything we offered and gave nothing in return except contempt. Her voice grew stronger. Some will say that we should have kept trying. Some will say that we should have accepted our place and waited for them to change. But I ask you, how long should we wait? How many generations should live in chains before we decide we deserve to be free? How many children should die while we beg for medicine that never comes? The assembly was silent, hanging on every word. We did not leave because we were weak. We left because we were strong enough to walk away. We left because we finally understood that our value does not depend on their approval. We left because we are human beings, and human beings do not beg for the right to exist. She looked directly into the cameras. And now they understand what they have lost. Now they gather at our borders with empty hands and desperate eyes. Now they send messages full of apologies and promises. Now, finally, they see us. President Moore's next words were spoken quietly, that they carried the weight of 30 years of suffering. It is too late. We have nothing to say to them. We owe them nothing. Not our skills, not our knowledge, not our forgiveness. Let them find their own way, as they told us to find ours. Let them learn what it means to be alone. The assembly erupted in applause. The sound echoed across human space, carried by broadcast to every corner of their territory. On the Dauntless, Admiral Hayes received word of the speech. He read the transcript and nodded slowly. Then he turned back to the observation window and watched the alien ships floating helplessly beyond the border. A young officer approached him. Sir, we're receiving another request from the Deshan delegation. They want to know if we will accept a diplomatic meeting. Tell them what we've told everyone else. Humanity is not receiving visitors at this time. Yes, sir. The officer left. Victor Hayes remained at the window for a long time, thinking about the past and the future. For 30 years, humans had worked harder than any other species in the galaxy. They had solved problems, built systems, cured diseases, and asked for nothing but basic dignity in return. They had been laughed at, insulted, denied, and ignored. Now the laughter had stopped. Now the galaxy needed them. Now, for the first time, humanity held all the power, and they had chosen not to use it. They had simply walked away, leaving their former masters to face the consequences of their own cruelty. That, Victor thought, was the most human thing of all. Not revenge, not conquest, just the quiet dignity of people who knew their own worth and refused to accept anything less. Let them learn, he thought, echoing the words of his president. Let them finally understand. Outside, the stars burned cold and bright, and the alien ships continued their endless, hopeless vigil. 6 months had passed since the day the humans walked out of the Galactic Council chamber. In that time, everything had changed. High Arbiter Vorik sat alone in his office on Thesa Prime. The room was cold because the heating systems were failing and there were no engineers to fix them. The lights flickered because the power grid was unstable. Outside his window, the great city that had once been the heart of Deshan civilization stood half empty. People had fled to the countryside, hoping to grow their own food, hoping to survive. He had not slept properly in weeks. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the dead. The children who would starve when the crops failed. The workers who had died in industrial accidents when safety systems broke down. The patients who had watched their doctors weep because there was no medicine left to give them. And always, behind those faces, he saw Ambassador Daniel Cole walking out of the council chamber with quiet dignity while the delegates laughed. A soft chime sounded. Vorex looked at his communication screen and felt his heart jump. There was an incoming message from human space. He accepted the connection with trembling hands. The face that appeared on the screen was familiar. It was Daniel Cole, looking much the same as he had 6 months ago, perhaps a little grayer at the temples. His eyes were calm and steady. "This is Ambassador Daniel Cole," the human said. "I understand you wish to speak with me." Vorex nearly wept with relief. "Ambassador." "Yes, please. We must discuss terms. The Council is prepared to offer full membership to humanity, unrestricted travel, formal apologies from every species, reparations for past mistreatment. Whatever you want, we will give it. Just please, help us." There was a long pause. Daniel's expression did not change. "I'm not calling to negotiate, Arbiter." The words hit Vorex like a blow to the chest. "Then why? Why contact us at all?" "I'm calling to say goodbye." Daniel let that word hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "Humanity has found new partners. During our years of service to the Council, we sent exploration ships beyond your mapped space. We made contact with civilizations you have never met. Species who live in regions you believed were empty. They welcomed us as equals from the first day. They saw our value without needing 30 years of proof. They treated us with respect without being forced to." Vorex shook his head, not wanting to believe what he was hearing. "You cannot abandon us. Without your help, billions will die. Entire civilizations will collapse." "Yes," Daniel said softly. "They will. Just as our people died on Kepler Colony while you watched and did nothing. Just as our children starved on border stations while your ships flew past with full cargo holds. Just as our scientists begged for research equipment that was denied because we were not important enough. The difference is, we asked for help. We gave you every chance. You chose to laugh. We were wrong." Vorex cried. "We admit it. We were arrogant and blind and cruel. But does that mean you will let innocent people die? Is humanity so cold?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle but firm. "We are not cruel, Arbiter. Despite everything you did to us, we are not cruel. We have left behind enough information for your scientists to maintain the critical systems we built. Instructions for the crop treatments, the communication algorithms, the medical procedures. If your people work hard, if they cooperate with each other, if they learn to do what we did for you for 30 years, you will survive. It will be difficult. Many will suffer, but you will not be destroyed." A small spark of hope flickered in Vorex's chest. "You would help us? After everything? We are helping you. We are giving you what you gave us. A chance to prove yourselves. Nothing more, nothing less. What you do with that chance is up to you." Vorex thought about this. He thought about how humans had arrived in the galaxy with nothing and built themselves into something essential. He thought about how they had faced mockery and denial and still kept working, still kept contributing, still kept hoping for acceptance that never came. "And humanity?" he asked. "What will you do?" "We will continue to grow. We will continue to explore. We will build new partnerships with species who see us clearly. We will raise our children in freedom, knowing they will never have to beg for the right to exist." Daniel paused, and something like sadness crossed his face. "I wish things had been different, Arbiter. I wish you had seen us as partners instead of servants. I wish you had listened when we asked for help. I wish my daughter was still alive. But wishes do not change the past. All we can do is move forward. Your daughter? She died on Kepler Colony. She was 7 years old. Her name was Emma. She liked to draw pictures of the stars because I told her that someday she would visit them. Daniel's voice remained steady, but his eyes glistened. I have spent 15 years representing humanity to beings who thought we were worth less than the dirt under their feet. I have smiled and negotiated and accepted insults for the sake of my people. But I could never forgive. Not after Emma. Vorax had no words. What could he say? What apology could ever be enough? "Goodbye, High Arbiter," Daniel said. "Perhaps in another 1,000 years, when your civilization has rebuilt itself, you will remember this moment. Perhaps you will teach your children to treat others with kindness, to see value in every species, to never assume that the quiet ones have nothing to offer. Perhaps you will do better than we did with us." His hand moved toward the controls. "Wait," Vorax said desperately. "Will we ever see humans again? Will you ever return?" Daniel considered the question. "The galaxy is vast, Arbiter. There is room for many civilizations, many paths, many futures. Perhaps someday, when enough time has passed and enough wounds have healed, we will meet again. Not as masters and servants, but as equals. Not as counsel and supplicant, but as neighbors." He almost smiled. "Until then, look to the stars. Remember that somewhere out there, the children of Earth are still reaching for new horizons. We always have been. That is what your council never understood about us. You saw a young species and assumed weakness. You never realized that youth meant we were still growing, still learning, still becoming something greater." The transmission ended. Vorax sat alone in his darkened office for a long time. Outside, the stars continued to shine, cold and distant. Somewhere among them, human ships were sailing toward new worlds, new friends, new possibilities. The Galactic Council had ruled known space for 10,000 years. They had thought themselves the masters of all they surveyed. They had laughed at the small, young species that had stumbled out of a yellow star system with wide eyes and hopeful hearts. Now, the laughter was silent. The masters sat in the ruins of their arrogance, finally understanding the truth that humanity had known all along. The quiet ones are the dangerous ones. The servants know where the valuables are kept. And the ones who keep reaching for the stars are the ones who eventually touch them in the darkness of space. Humanity sailed on, leaving the old galaxy behind like a chapter in an ever-expanding story. And somewhere out there, among species who had greeted them as friends from the very first day, the children of Earth were finally home.